folks. And thank you, Michael. I would thoroughly recommend going and visiting our new website, and also going basically and signing up to do one of these. I'll get rid of that because I don't want that, but what I wanted to do was put it onto there. Right, so a little bit about me. As Michael said, consultant, advocate, architect, engineer, digital designer. Basically, I've been around quite a lot and done quite a lot of things over the last 30 years. And I suppose the last 5 years I've focused on, maybe 5-10 years, I've focused on identity and access management as a branch of cybersecurity. And when I'm not helping folks with software engineering and the complexities of software development, you can usually find me in my local theatre, either acting, doing this on stage in front of an audience, or directing, so telling people what to do, or working behind the scenes on anything tech, or sound, or scenery, or anything like that. And actually, I've been building a SaaS solution for my, I suppose, the work I do in theatre. And this kind of led onto this talk. And before I go any further, I spoke a lot with Dave Barr, who some of you might know, who sadly passed away quite recently. And Dave gave me a lot of pointers and tips and everything else to kind of help put this presentation together. So this is its inaugural outing, and I'd like to dedicate this to Dave because of all the help that he gave me. So thank you, Dave. Right, so I'm going to talk about building a SaaS solution using WordPress. So hands up, everybody who's ever heard of the term SaaS. Brilliant. This is good. I like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a little time and just explain what my idea of SaaS is, and hopefully that resonates with your idea of SaaS as well. So let's take a look at the evolution of SaaS from the perspective of where we were and where we are today. So for folks who are familiar with WordPress, and in fact, even if you're not familiar with WordPress, I'm pretty sure everybody's familiar with content management systems. And content management systems literally are, as I've defined them there, they were kind of static, passive, kind of read-oriented, tightly coupled, back end and front end tend to be tightly coupled, content-focused, and auth is typically incidental. So when I talk about auth, talk about authentication and authorization, and I'll come on to that a little later. So let's look at the other end of the scale. SaaS stands for software as a service. And software as a service and software as a service solutions, and I'll come on and explain that in a second, are much more interactive, they're much more dynamic. They have some concepts associated with them depending upon the type of SaaS solution, but tenancy tends to be a big concept in there, and auth is typically core. Now, we didn't just go from kind of content management systems to software as a service. We kind of stepped through, and here are some of the, I guess, the commonalities between the two systems, but we stepped through, and essentially we're all familiar, I'm sure, with e-commerce solutions, which are kind of like a middle ground. And when you get to SaaS solutions, you've kind of got really a combination of all of the things that came together from a content management service perspective and an e-commerce perspective, and they all kind of now come into this software as a service type idea. So let's take a quick look at the SaaS paradigm. Now, they're called SaaS solutions, and there's a reason for that. It's because they're typically built up of multiple different applications. So a software as a service system tends to be essentially multiple different apps that come together and are organized in a way that's unified, and you typically will access them over the World Wide Web. So HTTP kind of browser type access most of the time, but essentially you can also access them via smart devices like your mobile phones and your tablets, and also mobile web browsers, as well as desktop web browsers and laptop web browsers and all that sort of stuff. And they come in two primary categories. B2C SaaS solutions are where you're effectively developing services. So a vendor basically develops a service and sells that service directly to customers. So you and me. And if you've ever used something like Grammarly, for example, as a writing assistant, then essentially you're using a B2C SaaS service. And if you've used personal scheduling, digital banking, and all those kind of things, those are typically SaaS services delivered as a B2C SaaS solution. The other end of the scale is what's called B2B SaaS solutions. And that's where vendors build software solutions that they sell to other businesses who then use them internally with their employees or contractors, or maybe they use them for kind of service providers internally as well. And if you've ever used travel booking systems or any time tracking or task management system at work, you'll probably be using a B2B SaaS solution. Now, before I kind of go on to the SaaS cornerstones, there's one other SaaS solution type or one other category called B2E. And B2E is sort of essentially where companies are building their own applications, delivering them to their own employees and contractors, but maybe doing it over an intranet. So SaaS is still a thing. It's still software as a service delivered over the web, but it's basically delivered over an intranet. B2B and B2E often are synonymous. And when you hear the term SaaS on its own, it's usually synonymous with B2B SaaS, although the term itself is just software as a service. Okay, so let's look at some of the cornerstones of a SaaS solution. Scalability is a big one. As you grow your customer base, you want your system to be able to scale. And scaling comes essentially in two forms. You've got vertical scaling, which is essentially, I'm going to throw a load more compute resource, put a bigger CPU in this box, add more storage, add more memory, have a bigger network pipe, right? But you still have a single box. And that's all very well, and that will get you so far. But you also need horizontal scaling. And horizontal scaling simply means I'm going to add another node to a cluster. So you can vertically scale the node. So you can say, I'll add more compute to that node, I'll add more memory, I'll add more networking, but you can also say, I'm going to add another machine that's going to work with that node, and another one, and another one, and another one, and it scales horizontally into a cluster. And with horizontal scaling, and in fact, hosting in general, you have this concept of fault tolerance and coverage, right? So let's say, for example, I was hosting my SaaS solution on AWS. Then I'm at the mercy of AWS and AWS's availability. But if I was to scale horizontally and have a node on AWS or a bunch of nodes on AWS and a few nodes on Azure or some more nodes on GCP, then I've got essentially a fault-tolerant system, right? So if Azure goes down and or AWS goes down, Azure is still up, GCP is still up, right? All those things. And also, some service providers might not do geographical coverage where you want your SaaS solution to be. So they might not operate in China, for example, but you can pick a vendor, a service provider that does operate in China. With horizontal scaling, you've got coverage in China, essentially. Tenancy is a big thing for B2B SaaS solutions. Essentially what you're doing is you're saying, if every one of you was a company, and I have my SaaS solution, every one of you could run an instance effectively of my SaaS product or my SaaS solution, but all across the same hardware. So we're sharing resources, but what we don't want to share is we don't want to share data. We want our data isolated. You want your data isolated, you want your data isolated, you want your data isolated, right? And so data isolation is very big for B2B SaaS solutions. And tenancy is all about resource organization, essentially. Aggregation also, from a data perspective, becomes quite important when you've got, let's say, one user, myself, right, that's maybe working with you, and with you as an organization. And essentially, I want to take my profile information across all three of those implementations, or all three of those instances. If I can aggregate the users across those as well, while still maintaining the isolation, that makes it much more usable for me as a user. Identity and access management is key in SaaS. If I can't prove who I am, then I can't prove that I can do what I'm trying to do. So from an identity and access management perspective, we call that customer identity and access management, and it's all about authentication and authorization. Administration is also interesting in a SaaS solution. If we take a normal administrator, we'll call them a vendor administrator, right? That's essentially the person who administers the SaaS solution, and in a B2C scenario, that's the only administrator we have, right? So the vendor can look over the entire SaaS solution, they can do all the configuration, they can control and set everything up, and of course the user just uses the applications that they're allowed to use. But in B2B SaaS solutions, organizations want to be able to do their own administration at a particular level. They want to be able to connect that SaaS solution to their internal systems. They want to be able to configure identity and access management. So you have, in a B2B SaaS solution, this idea of both a subscriber administration and a vendor administration. You also get what I call invitational workflows. So if, for example, you four were companies with employees and you were using my B2B SaaS solution, not all of your employees might be able to access that B2B SaaS solution. Let's say it was to do with payroll, and let's say you had a bunch of employees that worked in marketing. Well, they have no need to access this SaaS solution. So quite often what you find is that people are invited to using the SaaS solution, right? Rather than just because it's enabled in the organization, they use it. But invitational workflows can also be useful in B2C contexts as well, because you, for example, might be using a B2C SaaS solution, and you might have some friends and you think, oh, they would find that really useful, so I'll invite them, and that's gonna increase and generate more revenue for the vendor, right? And then the last thing on this slide is branding. SaaS solutions from a B2B perspective require typically a branding capability. Companies want to be able to make this solution look like it's actually part of their internal system, particularly if they are companies that maybe want to essentially use your SaaS solution or to also use with their customers, what we call B2B2C, or with other organizations, what we call B2B2B. Okay, it's 2026, so I can't possibly not have a slide deck without something that's AI related. There might also be another AI slide. I'll leave that one as a mystery. But AI, when it comes to SaaS, basically kind of boils down into two things: search, I'm looking for something, and agentic workflows doing something on my behalf, right? So why use WordPress, right? I mean, why build this stuff using WordPress? What does it give you? Well, this is an article. I'm not affiliated with Kinster in any way, shape or form. In fact, I'm not affiliated with any of the things I mentioned in this deck, except for myself. But I came across this. Kinster is one of our sponsors, and I came across this from Jeremy Holcomb. He's written a really interesting blog post about this, but this this quote for me was really interesting. You don't have to start from scratch when you're building a SaaS product. You can use the tools and systems and everything else that you're familiar with to build a SaaS solution using WordPress. Now, it's not all plain sailing, but let me go through some of the pros of why you would want to use WordPress and why I decided to use WordPress for the SaaS solution I'm building for theatres. you get a pedigree content management service, right? This thing powers over 40% of the web and has been doing so for donkey's years, right? So you kind of got to think they've learned a thing or two about high volume traffic and essentially being able to manage users at scale. Rich editing capabilities, ready-made functionality, and you've got advanced design management capability. And that's really important for styling and branding, right? And it's easy to extend all of that. This is the thing I like about it the most. You can go out and host WordPress, and you can essentially pay for that hosting. You can host it all yourself, and it's completely open source. The same thing that you get from Kinsta, you can go and essentially download and install yourself on your own hosting provider. You have all of the source code for the core available to you. You have pretty much all of the source code for all the major plugins that you'll want to use as well. So you have control over where WordPress runs. And that's quite important. I'll give you a for example. I run my instances of WordPress on Lightsail, which is an AWS platform. So it's kind of scaled down version of EC2. For all the development work I'm doing, I'm currently paying roughly, I would say it's roughly £100 a month for all of the compute resources I use, all of the network, all of the transport, all of the database management, everything. Right? So it's very cost effective from a development perspective. You get structured data storage out of the box with WordPress as well. So WordPress is support for MySQL and MariaDB. They've been around for like ever. And by design, WordPress has secure database, table and row organization. Data security is actually a first-class citizen in WordPress these days. Maybe it wasn't back in the day, but it certainly is now. And it's easy to create custom tables as well. So you get patterns for implementing upgradable data structures. Those are available in WordPress, and you've got out-of-the-box interfaces in WordPress that are provided to do that kind of thing. With MySQL and MariaDB, you get advanced data management. So you get essentially familiar tooling like MySQL Workbench, which you can use to identify bottlenecks in your data and also implement performance improvements as well. We talked about scalability. WordPress scales both vertically and horizontally out of the box. Now, there are some caveats to that. You get limited synchronization, essentially with plugins and themes. They're not automatically installed when you deploy a new node or a new instance in a cluster, but you can get around that, and I'll explain how you do that in a little while. And it's hosting agnostic. Like I said, you can host WordPress yourself, but you also have a raft of hosting providers out there that will essentially host WordPress for you. Kinsta actually it has a particular plan for multi-site. And multi-site is kind of the thing I would suggest you always use, even if you're building a B2C SaaS solution, because quite often B2C SaaS solutions, they become B2B SaaS solutions because it's a good way for vendors to make additional revenue from the product that they're building. Multi-site. You get tenancy via multi-site. I put a link, a QR code up there to the multi-site page on WordPress because lots of people don't really know multi-site. And multi-site has changed quite a lot since it originally came out. So if you scan the QR code, you can go read more about multi-site. But you get per subscriber administration, per site configuration, per site extensibility, per site theming and branding, and then you get this user aggregation capability. So it supports that subscription concept, that multiplicity concept, where I may be subscribed to you, you, and you as an organization, right? And you get to manage all of this through the centralized admin dashboard on WordPress. It's very powerful. Identity. This is probably the weakest point in building a SaaS solution in WordPress out of the box. WordPress comes with user ID and password authentication, which is very old school. Right? Pretty much nothing uses user ID and password authentication today inside the application. It's usually token-based authentication that gets used. You still authenticate using a user ID and password most of the time. We still haven't got around to using pass keys for everything, but we're getting there. But applications these days don't manage what's called basic authentication. They manage what's called bearer token authentication, and that's much more powerful than sending user IDs and passwords around everywhere. So you get basic customer identity and access management. It is basic. Limited registration capability. I'll show you how I've got around that. But you do get authentication fallback, and you essentially as well get subscriber isolation out of the box. So if I log in, if I register as a user, so I sign up as a user to you as an organization, it doesn't automatically mean that I'm a subscriber to you and you as well. WordPress automatically isolates me from that. User profile management, again, you do have quite a lot of user profile management out of the box in WordPress. You get profile aggregation, you get profile management. There's limited self-service capability, especially from a security point of view. So I'll show you how I've got around that as well. But you do get extensible profile information. So where you want to build user or add to user profile data inside your application, you can do that in WordPress out of the box because it's extensible. We talked about administration. You get the admin dashboard, which has super admin capability from a multi-site perspective. Customizable configuration, obviously, WordPress features. There is limited access control in the dashboard, right? You do have roles and capabilities, but the extent to which you can use roles and capabilities is quite limited by default. So I'll come along and show you how I've got around that as well. There's a REST API, so you can configure it via API. You can configure WordPress via API, but also you can add to the REST API as well. It's scalable, it supports rate limiting, and you can build your own resource servers using the REST API in WordPress. I'll explain and come on and show you how I've added OAuth 2 to the REST APIs. So essentially you have bearer token authorization within your resource servers. And of course, it's extensible, right? Everything in WordPress is extensible via plugins and themes. So, you've got this rich, ready-built kind of ecosystem. Most people will also think, why are you talking about security and WordPress in the same breath? Because isn't it the most hacked system on the planet? Well, yeah, it used to be the most hacked system on the planet, but that's the beauty of having a system that's hacked a lot. See, essentially, some of the most secure systems on the planet are the ones that have actually been hacked a lot, because effectively, folks have found ways to secure that system. So you don't have to go through that learning curve all from scratch. And in fact, there's a link to the WordPress security team, because security is a first-class citizen now in WordPress. So I would say WordPress is probably today one of the most secure systems on the planet. It's got a lot of hardening, lessons from experience, dedicated core security team. Caveat. Not all extensibility is secure, as most of you who have ever installed a WordPress plugin that's gone rogue will attest to. I use, and again, not affiliated with it, but I use WordFence. WordFence basically, out of the box, does everything for me. It's really good. It does threat detection, threat prevention, even the free version. That's the beauty, I think, with the plugins as well in WordPress, is they tier from a cost perspective. So you can start with the free plugins. As your user base grows, because you're building a SaaS system, that's what you want, is a growing user base, you can buy more functionality. And of course, your subscriptions pay for that. So, it's all win-win. Firewall with API rate limiting, and obviously, as I say, a scalable cost from that as well. I keep talking a lot about extensibility. That's one of the beauties of WordPress, right? Plugins, the way to add functionality without touching the WordPress core, and it's arguably one of the largest bodies of third-party code anywhere. Themes, the way to customize the design of a site. Hooks gives you actions and filters, which essentially is a way to implement additional functionality at specific points within the core or within effectively a plugin, and also a way to provide data modification at a specific point through filters as well. This is something I like from a SaaS perspective. These things are dynamically updatable. I can actually switch on auto updates, as you'll see in a second from the task kind of management task processing system within WordPress. I can switch on automated updates, and there's almost no downtime associated with these things, which if you're building a SaaS solution is very important because you've got lots of customers that are using your solution. I'm developing a SaaS solution. People who are watching, looking at this presentation are hopefully developing a SaaS solution. So development is a really key aspect of this. WordPress is a full stack development platform. PHP has got as much history, if not more, than WordPress, and it's got a rich ecosystem. Composer is like a bit like NPM, got like loads of packages available for pretty much everything you can think of. But of course, you can use additional frameworks. WordPress itself in Gutenberg uses React, but you've also got Laravel and Symfony as well as back-end frameworks that you can essentially leverage as well, and leverage code within those frameworks. You're not just restricted to what WordPress can do. I love WPM. If you've never used WPM as a development environment, use it. It is amazing, right? I literally, on that laptop, which admittedly is an M4, so it's like uber powerful, but it's essentially got Docker, loads of containers on there which effectively run Apache and WordPress and essentially MariaDB as well. And I've got an entire local development environment on that laptop. It supports interactive debugging as well. So I use Xdebug via Visual Studio Code to do interactive symbolic debugging of everything I do in WordPress, both front end and back end. It's brilliant. I can't say any more than that. There is another option. I'm just look at my notes a second. WordPress Studio, I think, is an alternative. I've never used it. I don't know what it's like, but yeah, if you give it a try, let me know. I'm sticking with WPM, but there we go. I like the fact in WordPress as well that it gives you what I call feature agility. So if I'm building a B2B SaaS application, and let's change it around, shift it up. You are my customer, you are my customer, and you are my customer. Maybe you are my customer as well. If you come to me and say, I'll give you some money if you could build this feature into your SaaS solution for me, I really don't want to go no, because not everybody else is going to use that. I'd rather go, yes, I could do that. It depends how much you're going to give me. And I can do that in WordPress, and I can do that in multi-site without affecting any other installation. That, to me, from a kind of economics point of view, makes great sense. Yeah, I want to sell this stuff, right? I'm building it, I want to sell it, I want to make some money out of it. Some of the hosting providers provide payment blocks on WordPress out of the box, right? I don't know what they're like. They look like they've got limited functionality. I use WooCommerce. It's an entire ecosystem designed for essentially purchasing stuff, purchasing software, purchasing subscriptions, add-on capability in your pricing plans, payment processing integrations out of the box with Stripe, PayPal, Apple, etc. And again, I can start with the free version and then tier it up to essentially get more functionality as I need to. Last but not least, I think on this one, automation. There's scheduled tasks out of the box. You basically get cron job, essentially capability, but managed out of the box using WordPress. You know, background dynamic updates, automatic. Gives you automatic horizontal scaling sync as well. I'll show you how that it can work, or what I'm doing with that essentially as we go on. Yes, WordPress 7 and beyond integrated AI. Search, agentic workflows, but actually for me, I think one of the most important things is I'm writing software. I have pretty much the largest body of code available to me to give to an LLM to go, actually, can you write this module for me? Or can you write this feature? Can you write this function? Whatever, right? And it does it brilliantly. I use Claude Opus 4.6 for anyone who's interested, and most of the software I've been developing is actually been written by Claude. Prompting has become a new industry thing, really. It's kind of working out how to get the LLM to do what you want it to do and giving it the right prompts. That's a talk in and of itself. If you've not heard your talk, if people have not seen your talk, then go listen to Rob's talk because it was brilliant on that entire subject. What's missing? Told you there were some things that it doesn't do. No identity management, really. There's no identity federation. There's no subscriber registration for B2B. Identity federation is all about the things where you can essentially use Facebook to log in with, or, for example, any other social account like LinkedIn or something like that. Or an organization can bring their own identity provider and use that to authenticate users rather than everybody having to subscribe and sign up all the time. No subscriber registration for B2B and limited support for self-service. I'm building a plugin. I call it SIAM Identify. It's a plugin. It's basically leveraging a third-party IDP. I'll show you my infrastructure. I'll show the architecture I'm working on at the moment. It basically leverages a third-party IDP to solve all of those problems. Not plugging my own plugin simply because it's still under construction. So no, you can't buy it at the moment, but there we go. But there will be a free version of it, and essentially it will help you to get over the hurdle of identity management. Access management is a similar problem. There's WordPress is kind of authorization constrained. Roles are not typically granular enough, and capabilities have, well, limited ability, but they do have, however, provide a great caching mechanism for using a third-party access control system, which is what I'm doing, which is another plugin in the family that I'm building, which is going to leverage a third-party access control service. It's an access control service that provides something called relationship-based access control, which is essentially where I can dynamically assign access permissions to users in respect of objects. So it's kind of like a subject-object type of subsystem. I'm not building it. It's already out there, and I'll show you what I'm using in a second. It enables much finer granularity of permissioning. Resource authorization. Again, WordPress isn't specifically API first. There is headless WordPress, but WordPress itself isn't specifically API first. You tend to get forms-based interaction, and there's proprietary authorization with limited access control capability as well. Yeah, I'm building another plugin as well. You get the theme here. That's doing delegated authorization for your resource server. So it's adding OAuth 2 to the WordPress REST API model, standards-based bearer token. And it's using the plugin, you can use it as a composer package as well. So you can require that package, that plugin as a package in your own modules that you're building. I'll explain why I'm doing this at the end, but it's kind of interesting. So I said there was no replication and horizontal scaling was a bit tricky and kind of keeping everything in sync. Well, I'm using something called Ansible. If you've never come across Ansible before, right, take a look at Ansible. Open source, Python implementation. It's a scripting subsystem designed for configuring nodes in clusters. You can literally say, I'll spin up a machine over there, wherever there happens to be, point a Ansible subsystem at it and using a secure shell, it will literally go and configure everything. It'll install all the applications it needs. From a WordPress point of view, it'll add all the plugins that you need adding, and it'll simply then configure all the connections to databases and everything. It's great. I didn't build it. I have no affiliation with it, but I use it. So Ansible is something that I would recommend. There's also limited observability out of the box in WordPress. I lump that under monitoring. There's no centralized performance view, no centralized operations view, no centralized logging really. But if you use any one of these, you get New Relic and Grafana give you agents that not only monitor WordPress, they also monitor your web server that you're front-ending WordPress with. They also monitor your database server, so it's MySQL or MariaDB. I also use Jetpack. Jetpack gives me notifications. The free install gives me notifications when my server goes down or when it comes back up again. And in a multi-site instance, that can be a per site setup as well. So it'll tell me if each of those individual sites is up or down. Again, these are available at scalable costs. You get free tier versions. I'm using the free tier version of everything. There is an open source option, Prometheus. If anybody's ever come across that, it's an open source monitoring system. You can use that as well. You get complete visibility across the stack, not just WordPress. So I'm almost finished. So what does my SaaS architecture look like? So there is my WordPress box with command and control, application server, resource server, and I self-host it. I put it on AWS. I use Lightsail, spin up instances. They're like $12 an instance, right? Ansible scripting. Apache is the web server that I front-end WordPress with. And the little icon thing here, which I won't use this pointer because you can't see it on it, but the little icon thing there is basically ACME. So the acronym is Automated Certificate Management Environment, right? So basically it deploys all my certificates for me automatically. I've still got to get that working, so I'm still doing a lot of that manually, but there we go. And that little symbol there just means it's an API. And so I use MySQL. Again, self-hosted, because I can. It's my DBMS. MySQL is both replicatable and shardable. If you've ever come across those terms, replicatable simply means I can replicate it to multiple instances. Shardable means I can take slices of the database and I can move them to essentially different instances of a MySQL server. So scalability, right, is off the chart. I can manage and essentially have hundreds of thousands of users going through this system. Keycloak is the IDP that I use. So IDP stands for Identity Provider. Keycloak is completely open source. So again, I self-host it. It's an authorization server and an IDP. They're combined into one. IDP simply means it's an identity provider. It authenticates you, makes sure that you are who you say you are. Authorization server means that it essentially issues bearer tokens, OAuth2 tokens for accessing resource servers, APIs. It gives me, and in fact, all of these things, as you can see as well, are on Linux boxes. Most of them are behind a firewall, all of them using HTTPS. It gives me social authentication out of the box. I can go authenticate with Apple or X or Facebook or Microsoft. It also gives me the ability to connect to federated or enterprise federation or authentication servers. So I can go and access, authenticate with Entra ID or Okta or any of the others. I'm using OpenFGA as the access control server. That's giving me relationship-based access control. And that essentially, again, is open source. There are hosted providers for Keycloak and OpenFGA, but you can host it yourself. And the installation and setup is fairly straightforward, especially if you've got Ansible scripts that are installing it. I'm using New Relic as monitoring and essentially the whole kind of overview of what the system's doing, simply because it, again, had a free tier and seemed like a reasonable kind of system. So I was just using that, and it seems to work quite well. I've also playing around with doing some feature flagging, which is you can do kind of like A/B testing. So you can say, I want to actually switch from using essentially this route in a piece of code to this route in a piece of code, literally with a flag that's defined somewhere. And that's essentially Flagsmith is a feature flagging server. Again, it's open source. You can host it if you want to. There are third-party services that effectively host it for you. Open features, the SDK that I tend to use are actually my plugins, so I can look and see whether a feature flag is set or not. My client side of things, the web portal, is a regular web application. I'm also building single page application functionality into it. I use React. I also use something called, if you've ever come across it, IIFE. IIFE stands for Immediately Invoked Function Expression. It simply means if WordPress has a version of React that could possibly clash with your application, IIFE effectively namespaces the version of React you're using in your application so you get no clashes. So I can use React at any version I like that's completely different to whatever WordPress is using, which again, from building an application or a SaaS application is fundamental, because I don't want to be constrained with by what WordPress uses. It's also responsive. WordPress, pretty much all of its themes anyway, by default are responsive out of the box. Well, at least the most recent ones are. So if I'm running in a web portal on a iOS or Android device, it's all kind of rendered exactly how I need it. But I've also got an app. There should be a native app as well for iOS and Android, some cross-platform functionality. And essentially, that's using the API that I'm building in WordPress, or the APIs that I'm building in WordPress, and I get all of the tokens for accessing those APIs from Keycloak. Stuff that doesn't go in the database, so Theatrical PA, which is the SaaS solution I'm building, you can kind of take video clips and audio clips and stuff like that. That goes in blob storage. I'm using an S3 bucket at the moment on AWS, but anything that gives you blob storage, all of the platform providers pretty much give you blob storage, and so you can use third-party blob storage for kind of storing that sort of stuff. This is the last slide, I promise. So I chose WordPress as a SaaS platform because I get SaaS, e-commerce, and CMS all from one solution. Something you do, something you buy, and something you see is all combined, right? So I don't have to build every aspect of my SaaS solution. I get out of the box vendor administration. I can evolve the whole thing progressively. It's scalable and it's extensible. I can use multi-site to support B2C, B2B, and beyond. So B2B2C, B2B2B, and all of the variations. It's horizontally and vertically scalable, plug-in architecture by design, and it's open source. That makes it very cost-effective from a development perspective. This one I added because, you know all of those plugins that I showed you that I'm building? They actually span out of actually building that functionality into the SaaS product to start with. So kind of I would like to say that WordPress gave me this opportunity to tease out functionality that's actually useful outside of my SaaS application. And that means, well, I can give that functionality and kind of people can use that functionality for free, but it also gives me additional revenue streams on that functionality as well. So it's given me this opportunity to build out different commercial spaces. That's it. Thank you very much.